So now we're going to talk about Paul Klee. Dr. Michael Baumgartner was the chief curator and the head of the research department at the Zentrum Paul Klee, Bern, Switzerland. He has been curating important exhibitions on Paul Klee and the Bauhaus and Klee's friendship with Kandinsky and Lionel Feininger. And since I wanted to do a deep dive into the Bauhaus, I think, since the two of Albers and Klee have been working together, I think it's a brilliant idea to have this opportunity to have a researcher on Paul Klee tell us more profoundly about his work and his ways of pedagogics. So, warm welcome to Dr. Michael Baumgartner. Hard for me.
Thank you. Oh, okay. Thank you very much for inviting me here. It's a real pleasure to try to show you some of the main ideas of Paul Klee at the Bauhaus. And let me summarize some milestones of Klee's artistic career before he became a teacher at the Bauhaus. Klee was born in Bern in 1879 as a son of a German father. He was a music teacher and a Swiss mother. He was a very gifted child, and already during his school time, he was more interested in scribbling grotesques, you see this here, in his school books, than to follow the classes. But at the other hand, you already see that he was very gifted in drawing. Some examples of his school books show this. At the age of 18, Klee had to decide whether to become a musician or a painter, and he decided to go to Munich and to start his studies. First, he went to a drawing school, Heinrich Knirr, and then was for a short time at the Munich Academy under Franz von Stuck. You see here some examples of his early landscape drawings and from this Knirr school. After a year, he left the academy and traveled to Italy in 1906 for a 6-month period of study and rented a room in Rome. The overwhelming richness of Rome's classical art plunged Klee into an artistic crisis. In 1902, he became engaged to the pianist Lili Stumpf, but he returned for some 4 years back to Bern, to his home, because he was unable to secure an independent living from his art. His primary sources of income in this time were engagements as a violinist in the Bern Music Society. In 1906, he married the fiancée Lili Stumpf, and the couple moved to Munich. And in 1907, their son Felix was born. Klee took the task of caring for the child, while his wife gained life for the family with piano lessons. Klee drew a lot in this time, in which he had absolutely no success on the art market. You see two examples. Here you see the accuracy of his lining, and at the same time you already can see how experimental he was with dark and bright. So these are the works from Klee from 1910 on. And a turning point in his artistic career was the invitation from the founders of the Blue Rider, Wassily Kandinsky and Franz Marc, to take part in the second Blaue Reiter exhibition in 1912. In 1914, and this is pretty famous, Klee traveled to Tunisia with his artist friends Auguste Macquet and Louis Moyer, and found his breakthrough in color. These are of the most known works of Klee, these aquarelles from the trip to Tunisia. Klee's, then in 1914, the First World War broke out. Klee's friend Franz Marc died at the front line, who had been, in contrary to Klee, an enthusiastic of the war. Klee himself was had to go to the army, was drafted into the German army as a soldier 1 year later, and he was sent to a recruiting depot in Bavaria to maintenance company of Air Corps. Even in this time, he took all possible time to work and even to participate in exhibitions. And after being released from military service, Klee rented a studio in Munich and was active in the post-war revolutionary movements in Munich. He got increasingly successful on the art market with several exhibitions in 1919 and signed a general contract with Hans Goltz, the owner of the new gallery. Here you see Klee in his studio in Munich, 1919. Klee's position at the art scene solidified by exhibitions and publications, and living in Munich with his wife Lili and his son Felix, he kept an eye out for a position on an art school to stabilize his financial situation. In 1919, he was approached by the Stuttgart Kunstakademie, which was searching for a successor to the professorship of Adolf Hölzel. A group of students that included the young Willy Baumeister and Oskar Schlemmer nominated Klee as the candidate and attempted to push him through this process. Klee himself did not object and was already making plans to move when his bids for the professorship failed. Surprisingly enough, the vote came from a specialist in contemporary art and was negative. It was Wilhelm Hausenstein who 2 years later published a book, Chiron, or a story of the painter Klee, in which he mystified Klee as a completely spiritual Oriental and spoke out against him. His argument was not directed against Klee as an artist, but against him because he said the didactic, I quote Hausenstein, was the diametrical opposite of Klee's most basic nature, his boundless personal imagination, and the absolute subjectivity and irrationality of his work. And one should leave him to the sphere of his hidden magical world, where these qualities would best unfold. So Klee did not get a professor in Stuttgart. However, on October 29, Klee received the following telegram from Walter Gropius, the founding director of the Bauhaus. Dear esteemed Paul Klee, we anonymously offer you a position as a master at the Bauhaus. You see here Gropius and this telegram. Unlike what had occurred with the Stuttgart Kunstakademie, this time neither Gropius nor the staff had any reservation about Klee's potential as a teacher, but all agreed that he numbered among the strong, well-known personalities in art and that he was needed for the Bauhaus. Indirectly, Klee had put himself in the running for when the offer of Stuttgart threatened to fall through. He made, in a letter to Johannes Itten, known his interest in what he called his Weimar mission. As you know, the Bauhaus was founded by Gropius. I can skip this. You see here the building, and you see the manifest that we have shown with Brenda. And Klee started teaching in January 1921 and was provided with 2 studios. In 1922, Wassily Kandinsky joined the staff and resumed his friendship during the period from the Blue Rider. Kandinsky had left Germany after the outbreak of World War I and returned to Moscow in 1914. Following the Russian Revolution, he became an insider in the cultural administration of the INKUK, the Revolutionary People's Commission for Art. However, by then, I quote, his spiritual outlook was foreign to the argumentative materialism of Soviet society, and as opportunities beckoned in Germany, he returned in 1921 and followed the invitation of Walter Gropius to come to the Bauhaus. Klee was during the 8 years, Kandinsky was during the 8 years at the Bauhaus the most important spiritual and artistic companion of Klee. And as time went on and the position for the individual artists at the Bauhaus would get more and more unsecure, Klee and Kandinsky hold on their position as painters. Since the days of the Blaue Reiter, however, the pecking order in Klee and Kandinsky's relationship had changed. No longer was Klee the minor graphic artist, but rather a representative of contemporary art in Germany, while Kandinsky first had to regain his position. Among the other masters at the Bauhaus, important for Klee, was Lionel Feininger, who was also a musician, so they could play music together, and Johannes Itten and Lothar Schreier, whereas with Oskar Schlemmer, who was the one who invited him to Stuttgart, he never really got very close to him, and neither with Laszlo Moly-Nagy, who came to the Bauhaus later. For Klee, the position at the Bauhaus meant economic security for the first time in his artistic career, with a fixed annual salary and studio space free of charge. At the same time, however, he was no longer a freelance artist as before, but part of a faculty of teachers, and such he had teaching responsibilities within a curriculum with an established number of hours. I show you then he was already in the beginning producing some advertising material for the Bauhaus. And as a faculty member, he was expected to collaborate not only in artistic matters, but also in institutional ones as well, whether in question of official policy, personal or public relations. Klee had little interest in anything unrelated to art and did not relish speaking in a large group. We meet and meet and meet, he complained in a letter to his wife Lili in 1922, as conferences multiplied yet again. When the controversies arose, he would adopt a distanced position, promoting a balance of interests and advocating the free play of energies. On the one hand, this demeanor earned him the authority of a superior disposition, but on the other hand, annoyed his colleagues sometimes as well. Klee is most passive, Oskar Schlemmer wrote. He is almost entirely silent during the conference. Also, Klee liked to play the role as a detached observer. He wrestled with the aspiration and goals of the school, expressing his opinions less in discussions and dialogue than in visual form. For example, the tightrope walker that can exemplify this in a paradigmatic way. It is a watercolor, oil transfer, like many of Klee's work of this time, between 1921 and 24. The tightrope walker, with the tightrope walker, Klee illustrated one of the central elements of his art theory, the subject of balance. Klee interpreted the state of equilibrium as a dynamic process of balance. He had described the tightrope walker in his lectures on pictorial form as an extreme example on a symbol of the balance of forces. The composition's unstable scaffold is a white cross shape, which is a reference to Johannes Itten's lithograph Gruß und Heil des Herzens. You see this here. So this is the reference point Klee goes to of Johannes Itten's work, Heil dem Herzen. From 1919 to 1920 on, the school had been shaped by the pedagogical and aesthetic ideas of Johannes Itten, who thought the forecourse or preliminary course that was the introduction to the ideas of the Bauhaus. Itten was influenced by his teachings, by the ideas of Franz Žižek and Friedrich Wilhelm August Fröbel. Itten was a follower, and you see him here once again, or was a follower of Matstadsnamen, an esoteric mindset that was largely derived from Zoroastrianism. He observed a strict vegetarian diet and practiced meditations as a means to develop the inner understanding and intuition, which was for him the principal source of artistic inspiration and practice. Eaton's mysticism and the reverence in which he was held by a group of the students, some of whom converted also to Matstadsnamen, created conflicts with Walter Gropius, who wanted to move the school in a direction that embraced mass production rather than solely individual artistic expression. The rift should lead to Eaton's resignation from the Bauhaus and his prompt replacement by Moholy-Nagy. Beneath the cross, you see the symbol of Bauhaus designed by Oskar Schlemmer. So in the tightrope walker, Klee unifies in his image of balance either Eaton's, let's say, esoteric view of what Bauhaus should go to, and Schlemmer's more abstract and modernist symbol of the Bauhaus. Klee, eager for compromises before the conflict escalated, and being aware that he himself was declined 3 years ago by the Stuttgart Academy with almost the same arguments that Eaton was reproached, namely to be irrational and romantic, wrote the following in December 1921 in a consolatory statement regarding the meeting of the Council of Masters. He wrote, "I welcome the fact that forces so diversely inspired are working together at our Bauhaus. I approve of the conflict between them in the effect is evident in the final product. To tackle an obstacle is a good test of strength. It is, if it is a real obstacle." I show you here two examples of the working on of Walter Gropius' draft of what the Bauhaus is organized, and Klee's schema that in the middle has a difference, a very important difference to Gropius, that for Gropius in the center is the construction, the Bau, the architecture, and then you see the workshops and the materials, and you see the studies that are important for them. Klee, in his way, shows the same schema, but in the middle he has also indicated the construction and the stage. So it is like an answer of Klee's or a wish of Klee's vision, how the Bauhaus should not only be directed to architecture, but let's say the stage and let's say painting also has an important role in it. Since Klee had never thought before, he had no established pedagogical framework to fall back at the beginning of his Bauhaus instruction. Instead, at first, he felt his way along with a composition practicum, and then beginning in the winter semester, he developed his color and form theory. This is here. He called them the teaching notes on pictorial formation, a systematic curriculum that became a standard component of the Bauhaus Foundation's course and was mandatory for all second semester students. The majority of the Bauhaus students went through this curriculum, here the teaching notes on pictorial form. To start, he described the aim of his teaching as follows. My task, I see it clearer and clear from the beginning on, is to transmit my experiences in the identical creation, drawing and painting, which is always based on the composition and construction of multiple entities to unity. This experience I transmit partially in synthesis and partially in analysis. Art, and that was like the conclusion, does not reproduce the visible, but makes it visible. This maxim was behind Klee's personal theory of color and form, which was a fundamental component of the preliminary course. In 1925, the foundations of his design theory were published and in condensed form as a second in the pedagogical sketchbook. So what he wrote down for his lectures in the notes for formation, he was then published in the pedagogical sketchbook in a very short form. Central to Klee were the terms metamorphosis and genesis as constant movement and development, which he considered a kind of reductionism of natural and artistic growth and form processes. Genesis as formal motion is the essential thing in a work. The affinity between processes of artistic creation and processes of natural growth and development was one of the central postulates. By systematizing creative material and by reducing the contingent to its essence, the artist creates, I quote, a formal cosmos that is similar enough to the great creation, that a breath suffices to make the religious expression religion itself. In this context, the work of reducing the contingent to its essence is symbolically related for far more than any formal or technical understanding to a morphogenetic concept of creation. I show you some examples what means this reduction for Klee. Already in 1917, he reduced natural growth to a system of linear and analytical schemas, like, for example, in arrangement of stalks, which remember very much, let's say, to what also, this is a second example from 1917, the geometrization and the, let's say, identification of the main elements of a plant. This remains very much, for example, to schemas that Carl Gustav Caros, who was related to Goethe, showed in his elements. When speaking about Klee's affinity to Goethe and to emphasize the romantic worldview, one has to take into consideration at the same time his preference for ironic mutation of the assertive claim, which was also characteristic for Romanticism and past Romanticism. This ironic distance also saved Klee from deducing universalist structures and proportion ratios in nature from mathematical laws and division ratios, like, for example, Johannes Itten used to do with the affinity to esoteric number mysticism. And despite this profound interest, at the same time also Klee's ironical view on all these efforts to derive the structure and proportion ratio in nature and art exclusively from mathematical laws and division appears, it works like the ironically trunked number tree, for example, where he, during the wartime, he played with the numbers and was not, in this sense, taking them serious as in the other examples. Regardless his skepticism against any kind of esotericism, Klee's teaching was grounded within a cosmic holistic system and its connection to considerations of worldview, science, and philosophy. This diagram, I, you, world, illustrates Klee's vision of artistic perception and representation in a paradigmatic way. The subject, the I, of the artist that is related to the object of perception by its optical visions or appearance. So you see the Auge, das Ich, and the Du. This, however, is only one aspect of the artist's vision, because it is related to the object also by what Klee calls a non-optical earthly way, which you see on the bottom, and an upper spiritual circle, what Klee calls the cosmic connectivity. The process of true artistic perception includes all three ways of connection. Also typical was the fact that Klee was never dogmatic, but instead thought to foster independent judgment on the part of his students. Any gullible courteousness was essentially deflated when he entered the lesson by saying, "This is one possibility, one that, by the way, is I myself do not use." The bildnerische Formlehre started with the point, and the point evolving to the free line. So you see here one of the first pages of the Formlehre, which was Klee's manuscript for the lectures from 1920 on to 1922. The line is active if it's free. And you see also that in his artistic work, he often referred to what he taught in his courses. So Klee's teaching was permanently also related to what he did as an artist. It's a very famous quote of Klee, taking a walk, a line for a walk, which means you can, with the line, go everywhere, but the line can also be, let's say, like the border of the shape of a form. The line is free, but is also, can also be passive. What was one of the fundamental principles of Klee was his will to show to the scholars what the creational process in art is, in a way, parallel to creation process. He was very fond of botanics. We have about 45 of these sheets where he collected plants and dried them and put them like here on a sheet. And this one is a funny one because these are all species of Trifolium, which is Klee in German, Klee. So you don't see it really here. He wrote to this all the Latin writing was there, and then he called it what all is called Klee. So it's like himself. This is probably the most symbolic representation of what he tried to show to his pupils. You see, this is the growth of a plant, and he begins with what he tells to his scholars is wrong. This is the figure at right, where all the parts of the plant are in fact treated equally. You have no energetic view of the plant. This is right. And at the other hand, you have, so this is the example here. Then you see how Klee proposes to depict this process of growth. First, in the roots and in the soil, the energy flows from the soil to the roots and brings what he calls the stem and the growth, and it is related in an energetic process. And finally, to what is the blossom of the plant. And for him, it's important to make visible what the forces that come from the soil through the roots are in the proportion of what is the form of this. You see, in some works, he exemplifies this view of growth, and at the other hand, he always goes further on in his artistic work, like you see it here. Another example is how he explains the form of leaves to his students. You see this It was called Drawing from Leaves After Nature, with consideration of the articulating energies in the veins. The multitude of shapes and forms of the leaves, oval, lobate, jagged, is the result of an energetic flow in the veins. A closed oval form is the morphogenetical expression of a balanced flow of energy. The lobate form, so this is the oval, the lobate form is the result of an increased force, while a jagged shape results from a rupture of the outline caused by overpowering tension. Klee has used the metaphor of a tree as a symbol of the artistic work and the artist himself. The artist's orientation in terms of temperament and life corresponds to the tree, to his root system, which carries water and minerals to the organism. Juices flow to the artist from this branching and subdividing order, passing through him and through his eyes. The artist himself amounts to a simple medium as a trunk of the tree, and the work is comparable with trees, branches, and leaves, just as the latter unfolds and develops in every direction in time and space, so does the work. Klee's image of a tree had served as a conceptual metaphor illustrating a central postulate of modern art and the newly founded Bauhaus, namely the rejection of the traditional demand that art should directly reflect nature. No one would expect the branches of a tree to take the same form as its roots. Anyone can understand that the upper part of the plant cannot be an exact reflection of its lower parts. You see here some examples of what Klee did in his artworks, like this beautiful work. And you see another connection between what he developed in his lectures and what he continued in his artwork, like an illuminated leaf at the right side. There's another example of geometric kind of trees, growth of the tree. Here you see how Klee developed in his course. He went also back to the very basic elements of 1 and 2, which means how a system or an organism is built up. And he developed it into what you see, for example, the veins of a plant, which are also formed by these very basic elements, 1, 2, 3. And here another example how he went on in his artistic work in paintings like growth of plants or ripening growth. Klee's students consistently describe Klee's teaching as factual and thorough, but also as a work of art in itself. The assignment often sounded like a mathematician's or physicist's formula, but precisely considered it was purest poetry, said one of his students, Helene Schmidt-Nonne, describing her experience with him. Walking slowly up and down or standing in front of a blackboard with his back on the class, he presented his lessons in monologues marked by great evocativeness and persuasive force. And the quality of Klee's course was well known, and already after the first semester was very appreciated by scholars. Among the listeners were not only Bauhaus scholars, but also young people that were attracted by what they heard about Klee's lectures. The young composer and musician Stefan Volpe, for example, followed Klee's course from 1923 to 24 and remembered it as follows. We did learn then, Klee taught us these things, to bring anything in relationship to anything. We had to combine things, a spiral to a bottom, with artificial eye, with a shoelace, and we had to use these things independently upon their subjective meaning. We had to use them as formal elements, and as formal elements they became neutralized, so a dead bird existed only in a formal textual relationship. Let me show you some examples of how Klee avoided color. For his color system, there was not, let's say, the color circle, but he developed the color sphere, or the, as you see it here. In the middle, there was the gray, and all the colors were on the surface, the main colors, and so all the colors developing to the medium were related to what is the gray point. So his color system then, for example, here, the relation of the three main colors, degrading and grading up. Here, his position of the colors on the palette of the artist, and also going from the center to the other circles. What is about time? Yeah. So I show you some other examples of how systematically he developed the gradation of the colors, which means here from blue over yellow to red. And so it was a very numerical analysis of what the relation of the colors can be in a structured way. At the right side, you see how, well, mathematical also this can be described. See some examples of Klee's artistic work, which is the transition, which is in a way nearly related to what he develops in his teaching. Here in the polyphone white and the division in the evening. Let me say some words about Klee's studio. Here you see him together with his colleagues, Feininger, Kandinsky, Oskar Schlemmer, and Scheier, and himself in the Weimar studio. But the studio of Klee was something like a Wunderkammer. It was, let's say, a privilege for the students or the scholars to go there. Klee's studio was known as a place where he was in his creative process, and he really assembled, if you look at this photograph, all kinds of objects he found, natural, petrified fossils, and so Klee's studio was like the basis of his creational process, and was something always like a secret for his students. For example, he collected shells, and he also used them for painting vessels. So it was a permanent process of finding things in nature and also developing them for his own creative process. Klee was very admired by his students for his let's say, brilliance, and also for his kindness. And this is Ernst Carlyle, who depicts him as the Bauhaus Buddha, who was very much admired by especially his female students. I will speak about this in the weaving, in the textile workshop. So this reflects very well the position of Klee at the Bauhaus. At one hand, he was very detached from, let's say, the controversies, and at the other hand, he was very involved in what was his teaching. It was not that he was distanced from everything. If not, the students and the scholars would not have loved him or liked him that much. One example, as we saw before, is Joseph and Annie Albers, who were both in his teaching, and who both took a lot from him, and in fact said that Klee was something like the example for them how creativity and analysis of the pictorial elements can bring further, and certainly, and the most important, Joseph Albers said, was the intuition. As in Klee always said, we can construct and construct, but intuition is still very important. And Albers remembered this at Black Mountain College as one of his own maxims. In 1926, as we heard, the Bauhaus had to dislocate because there was no more possible to stay in Weimar. And in Dessau, Klee could take over this beautiful master house with a new studio in Dessau. This house he had together with Kandinsky. There were two parts. And you see the Bauhaus in a historical photograph, and after 89, when the Democratic Communist Republic was a little bit no more in a very well shape. So today everything is renovated. You see Klee's studio here in Dessau. And now let me speak about his becoming teacher after Muche in the weaving workshop. This was for him probably the most important experience as a teacher, to work together with the weavers. You see here Annie Albers, as second from left, and you also see Otti Berger, and you see Lena Meyer-Bergner. And Klee was very interested in textile already before. When he was in Tunisia, he collected textile and fabric, and he created works that refer directly to, in the title, to what is carpet or textile. So he had a great affinity to what in the textile workshop would wait for him. You see here, and he was very, very impressed, very much impressed by the weaving technique that he could perceive then when he was the master at the weaving shop. So he was directly also took over problems from what is, let's say, in weaving, interacting of colors, the threads going, overlaying, and in fact, we can say that Klee's what is called the polyphonic paintings are in a way very closely related. This is the polyphony work from 1930, is directly related to what he had together with experienced in the textile workshop. Let me just emphasize one of these scholars. It's Lena Meyer, Lena Bergner, who married then Hannes Meyer, and she was a student at the Klee's, first in the preliminary course, and then of the pictorial form, and in the weaving workshops. And she is the one of which we have most notices of what she took from Klee's teaching. So look at these examples where you can follow, let's say, that could also be from the teaching from Albers, the different complementary contrasts, the interaction of colors in a chest plate. This shows how fertile Klee's teaching was for scholars like Bergner. This is another example. And this is all by her, named as from Klee's teaching. But it's naturally not notes from the teaching, but it's, let's say, free exercises inspired by Klee's teaching. Klee arrived at the peak of his fame in 1929, when he was, with the distance, the most successful artist. And in this period, he also was no more that much enthusiastic of what the Bauhaus could bring him. So he was looking for another position. And in 1930, he became a professor at the Düsseldorf Academy, and he left Bauhaus. And in 1933, he had, like all the others, to leave Germany and to come back to Switzerland. So I would like to show you some of this material, which is really abundant, on the internet platform of the Center Paul Klee. It's all together like 4,000 sheet of this teaching. There is you see the homepage Klee Gestaltungslehre. You will find it if you go to the homepage.
Is it in English?
No, it's not in English. But where am I? Oh, here. Okay, this is this database. No, sorry, I'm in the wrong. I have to go here. Where is it? Ah, here. Sorry. Where are we here? It's about. It was in this one. Is this the? Okay, here you see this material. It's the what I called A, Bildnerische Gestaltungslehre, is the teaching notes on form that started in 1921. And if you go to this link, you see here, you can scroll through and you have the transcription of this whole teaching notes. And this is what is the Bildnerische Formlehre. You can go through, for example, I can. So it's a really abundant material that waits also for students to be gradation of from gray to white. And also here it's the transcription of a Bach symphony. So it's really rich, but this is only what Klee taught in the Weimar course, whereas what is here, the Bildnerische Gestaltungslehre, is more abundant. This is not in a book, but it's loose papers. And for example, I can show you some of the examples how this material is. Here we see again examples of numeric gradation of colors. You see, let's say, the movement from black to white through gray. So it's, if you take it all together, over 3,000 sheets from this course. And as, even if you don't understand German, with the transcription it is open to research. And you see, I can show you what is so very fascinating, how clay works. Is, let's say, planimetrical. This is from, no, it's not this one. Progressions. It's about progression. So there you find really also this very analytical and precise way of construction in Clay's work, which is like, let's say, the other side of the medal of this artist, which who is more known by his, let's say, playful works. Okay, that's an invitation to go to this site and to study clay. Thank you for your attention.